Come on, off you go. Go on, you go out. Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. This is the last of the tulip pots that I've been keeping under cover all winter because I've learnt the hard way that if I leave them outside all winter and it's really wet, the pots get saturated. Now that's bad for the tulip bulbs. Tulips like really good drainage, and also bad for the pot because you get the compost saturated with water, and then if it freezes hard, it expands, and that's what breaks the pots. So I keep them under cover, but as soon as I start to see the new growth, bring them outside, they can get light, they can get whatever rain we have, and we should be seeing the first tulips flowering here in about a month's time. On today's programme, Rachel explores a large and beautiful garden in Kent that is the creation of one single gardener.
I've always loved flowers, ever since I can remember. Just like oxygen to me, they've always been that way, and to surround myself with them feels just the most natural thing in the world.
We visit a captivating garden in Cambridgeshire and meet a couple who are self-confessed plantaholics.
If I buy a plant a week or two, I'm happy. If not, I get withdrawal symptoms.
Harriet creates a colourful spring display in a container.
There's colour, there's movement through it. It's that real lift that's needed to start the season.
And I'm making a start today on my new bog garden. One of the things that took place over winter here was the widening of these beds in the orchard. Now, if you have long, narrow beds, and it doesn't matter how actually big they are, it could be in a small garden, it could be in a huge garden, but the principle is the same. You do need repetition. You need rhythm to the borders. And you can get that by using the same colors. You can have it by shape, as long as that rhythm is maintained. And I've got one shrub that I'm going to repeat in between the trees. That one plant is a hydrangea. I've got two kinds. The first is one of the best known hydrangeas that you will find anywhere, Annabelle. In fact, strictly speaking, this is not just Annabelle, this is strong Annabelle. And the reason for that is that Annabelle can droop, whereas strong Annabelle has been bred to have stronger stems, so they will hold it more upright. And with it, I've got one called Limelight. Annabelle flowers in summer. This flowers in late summer and has slightly more pointy heads, which start out lime green and then turn a sort of creamy white touched with pink. So if I place this there, that will be up here. I can prune it harder if I want to, but I want it to be fairly substantial. I can have Annabelle in here. Let's put her back. Okay. So we'll do alternate. So this can come in there, and this can go back down there. Now I've deliberately put them so that they're set back, they've got room to grow, and also they will be in light shade. And that's what hydrangeas like best. And they will cope with most conditions and most soils. And they love a nice loose root run. So any leaf mold, compost, anything you can add to the soil will help. Now in terms of planting them, there's no mystery. Make a hole, put them in it. Let's see if that height is about right. If you're planting any shrub or any woody plant, don't be tempted to plant it too deep. Better to have it just a little bit too high than too deep, because the risk of getting saturated with water in a very wet year is real. So when you take it out of the pot, always try to hold as much as you can. Lovely. So let's pop that in there like that. And then we'll gradually fill back round it and firm it in well, just using my heel. So I'm not crushing the roots. Before I bring the soil right round it, I'm going to water. Give it a really good soak. Don't stint on the water at this stage. We'll let that soak in. Now pull back the soil around it and then make sure it's mulched really well. And that will keep the moisture in and the weeds down and give them a chance to get established. And from this framework, new shoots will grow, and it's the new shoots that will carry the flowers. Now, last June, Rachel went to visit a garden near Canterbury, full of lovely things, but also featuring a pair of borders flanking a lawn like these, but on a much bigger scale, and beautifully and meticulously planted.
This is Old Bladbean Stud, a private garden in the heart of Kent. It's a garden of many facets, with a wild side where nature romps away. A romantic idyll where plants find their right place, to a formal bordered lawn which has an unexpected twist. It's all the handiwork of amateur gardener Carol Bruce, who's been developing her artistry here over the last 18 years. I must say, Carol, you immediately get the sense that this is the garden of somebody who loves plants. And where does that come from?
I've always loved flowers, ever since I can remember. Just like oxygen to me, they've always been that way, and to surround myself with them feels just the most natural thing in the world.
So at the very beginning, was there a sort of a grand plan?
I always plan everything I do from the nuts and bolts upwards. It's motivated by the heart, but everything I do is definitely led by the head. So if I don't make sure that the plan is doable, I know that it will end in heartbreak. So it really was a case of discipline myself now so that I don't have to regret having taken on too much in the future.
That's really interesting, actually, something quite unusual. I don't hear that very often. Can I ask what your background is?
Yes, I'm an economist by training. For me, it's a case of measure twice, cut once.
I think I can learn a lot from you. So what was your inspiration when you arrived here?
Walking the dogs in the countryside and the fields around here, so many times I'd come around a corner and just be riveted. And I wanted to try and extract that and see if I could actually recreate it deliberately on the ground. So the layout, the sense of journey, it's walking in the woods.
I feel, Carol, like I'm on a sort of magical mystery tour. I'm just following the path and letting it take me where it wants, really.
You never quite know what's round the next corner.
Carol, I feel like I'm in a secret garden. You've brought me somewhere with a very special atmosphere and lots of roses.
Yes, I thought, I wonder if I can make a rose garden which feels like an enchanted glade. And it really does feel that you stumbled into a place where Mother Nature's just gone completely wild with the flowers.
They seem to be old roses mostly.
They are, yes. Probably 3/4 of the roses are the proper old-fashioned varieties. And the reason people didn't grow them so much these days is because they're very unruly. So with these, I decided I'd train them over these metal domes so that it actually looks like a well-behaved rose bush covered in flowers. But it's normally 3 plants.
It looks like one big one, but you can see the structure there where you've got the stems just sort of bent down. And how exactly do you do that?
Okay, every winter I cut out the 3rd oldest stems and then I tie in the full length of the new stems, arching over so that they make a dome shape. And roses always try and flower as high as possible. So if you lay a stem down as horizontally as possible, it won't know which bud is highest and it will break into flower all the way along the stem.
What about the perennials? Are you still buying perennials? How do you...
No, I never bought any plants, any perennials. They're all grown from seed. And I very much left them to it. I don't deadhead anything. They're all encouraged to self-seed. For me, there are no baddies in the garden. There's only balance.
I've stolen away for a few moments so I can really immerse myself in Carol's planting. She's got some quite unusual plants. There's the Phuopsis just down there with its little sparkly pink flower heads. It's got this wonderful sort of sense of flow and movement. And most impressively, she uses restraint. For example, the geranium, the white geranium, just floats all the way through it. And then she uses alliums, and I would be tempted to put 3 or 4 different types of allium in this area, but she's just got the one, Allium Christophii, and she repeats it, and it just pops up everywhere. It's so effective. But it's also considered, and I think that's something quite rare. Carol never waters her garden, and she mulches using only materials from plants cut back in November and strewn around them. Nothing gets taken away and nothing is added. She carries her approach across the garden, but there's another area which couldn't be more different. Goodness me, Carol. I wasn't expecting this. It's so different and very palatial.
It was an opportunity to use perspective and repeat. So both ends and both sides are mirrors of each other. And to do that, I designed 1/4 of it, knowing that it was going to be like butterfly wings. I was going to flip it over. It's designed to be looked along. Obviously, it's 300 feet long. That was the only real way to make use of the shape of the space, was to make sure that I had a kind of diorama effect. One of the things that I noticed, particularly in the rose garden, is that having finished it, it had a peak of about 6 weeks, and then the sense of loss is very great. And as I'm out there every day, it made more sense to try and have continuity of the view so that it looked like the same landscape collage and take over from each other in succession.
So that's a really interesting way of having continuity and difference at the same time, because you're sort of building on what's there and just extending that further along.
That's right. I'm almost recreating the same garden with different plants through the season. An example of this is here we have Salvia Maynite, which starts to flower at the end of April, and it's lovely for about 6 weeks. And then as that goes out, I've got Torowskia Blue Spire, which is coming up and will take over a very similar role in terms of the feathery shapes. And Campanula lactiflora creates tall blue billows, and then tall blue billows is done later by Acidia Little Carlo.
You're clutching something there which looks like...
It's the blueprint.
Ah,
yes.
the plan. Can I have a look? Give you my arm there.
There we go. Let's see if we can unroll it. It's still got mud on. It's very long. I think of all the gardens that I created, this one needed the most direction in terms of making sure that I stuck to the plan and got to the end of it, because it took me 3 years to grow and plant. And I think I regard my blueprint very much as like the box lid of a jigsaw puzzle. I drew up plant lists by colour and by height, and I actually sat on the stone bench at the end with a blank copy of this graph paper. But it's an exercise in discipline and precision.
Now, I want to know how you manage this garden.
I'm the only gardener. That was always the idea. It really is a way of trying to develop methods whereby one person using the right tools can look after something which looks as if it would take an army.
I think actually it would take most people an army to look after this. I think you're an exception. And it feels to me like a labour of love.
Oh, most definitely. Absolutely.
Well, I love that garden, and I was so impressed that Carol looked after it entirely on her own. But that is a tribute to the planning that she does. But her approach to gardening couldn't be more different than my own. You know, she's careful, she plans and then executes her plans very carefully. Whereas I tend to be much more random. For example, the bed behind here, when we made it, I knew I wanted to plant species roses. And then I thought, well, okay, I'll underplant with hellebores, but which hellebores I hadn't worked out. So I tried various ones. And the orientalis, which are at their very best now, look great. But I've also added some of these new type of hellebores. Now, in the last 10 years or so, there's been a big upsurge of breeding hellebores, crossing evergreen varieties that are tender from the Mediterranean with hardy, very floriferous varieties from the north. And what you end up with are these very strong growing evergreen hellebores. They flower for much longer than the orientalis types. They'll start flowering before Christmas, and the flowers themselves tend to be rather more upturned than, for example, these, which are straight orientalis. But when I tried growing them together underneath the species roses, it didn't work. But finally, I found out that the rust of the tin worked well with these colours. I hadn't thought it through, but the rusty tin shed was the missing element to make this particular plant combination work. Now, it's time to visit one of your gardens, and we're going to the Netherlands, where Lamy Alkmaar shares her garden with us.
Welcome to my backyard. I'll show you around. At this moment, it's the time of the blooming fluxes, and the flower border changes to red. We have a low part in the garden and a higher part, so you have different views. In combination with the purple loosestrife and persicaria, it gives much color. I always remove old leaves so the border stays green as long as possible. The stems of the Thalictrum are beautiful, and I leave them until spring. I love to walk around in the garden, and then there's always something to do, like tidying up some plants or prune here and there. There's always water in the garden for the birds, and I like to feed them every day. I really enjoyed showing my garden to you. I hope you liked it. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Lamy, for showing us your garden. It's lovely. Now this, I confess, is not lovely yet, but it will be, trust me. Because this is the basis for the new bog garden. Now a bog garden is an area that never dries out, just perfect for plants like Gunnera, Regersea, Ligularias, hostas, that thrive in having damp feet all the year round. So I've got to, first of all, create the conditions so this will drain very slowly. So we've dug it out, now I need to line it. There is no point in using high quality liner because we want it to actually leak, but just slowly. Now these are bags that we had chippings in, and they will do the job perfectly well. So all we need to do is lay them down like that and overlap. We are burying plastic, but as with all use in plastic in a garden, the best thing you can possibly do is use it. Now, what I'm going to do is weigh these down as I go. Now this is pea shingle, which you can get from any builder's merchant. But before I put it down, I've got a screwdriver and I'm going to puncture the plastic. And simply make holes in it. The job of the stone is to stop those little holes I've made from clogging up. Ideally, you're looking for a layer of 2 to 3 inches. You can do this on any scale. You can do it in a container. There are just 2 things to remember. One is to line it with plastic, but make holes in the plastic. And secondly, use a rich compost. These are plants that really like lots of nutrition as well as water. I will put the soil in, and that will hold the plastic at the sides and then trim off the edges, because obviously we don't want to see any of the plastic. Now, counsel of perfection would be to put a perforated pipe along the bottom on the stone and then put the soil in, and the pipe could then stick out of the ground, and you could attach a hose pipe to it whenever you needed to top the water up from the underneath. I haven't done that mainly because this area floods fairly regularly. We have very high rainfall, and my guess is that once I've soaked it thoroughly, it will barely need topping up. It will stay damp. Right, this is the slow part. I will start taking the soil back in. Probably a bit boring to watch me do this. So let's go and see a really fascinating garden. Dave and Val Bunnage used to run a nursery near St Neots in Cambridgeshire. And then when they retired, instead of just gently taking it easy, they decided that it was time to indulge in their plant obsessions and make an extraordinary garden.
We started the garden after we had a business here with greenhouses in which we grew cyclamen, geraniums, fuchsia baskets.
To me, it was a different planet. We finished the business in 2008, and for the last year, the first time, I didn't enjoy doing it. So that was a good reason to pack up.
And then when we decided to retire, we thought we'll turn it into a garden. So we got rid of the greenhouses and developed the garden. We never had a master plan, no, we just did it as we went along.
If I buy a plant a week or two, I'm happy. If not, I get withdrawal symptoms. Yeah, definitely, plantaholic. I just love plants, especially unusual and rare plants. That's what we look for, yeah.
If we were going out, if we see a nursery,
Yeah.
we have to call in just to see if we can find something a bit different.
We've got just over 150 acres. There must be 100 pines, about 50 bamboo, 200 ferns, probably 150 hostas. So every sort of square inch has got a plant in it. I get irritated if I can't find room for another plant.
The size of the plot is 1 acre. Lots of different little gardens.
The garden we are at the moment is my interpretation of a Japanese garden. And the one next door is my interpretation of a little Italian garden. I like Japanese forms. I like Japanese style gardening. This plant we purchased as a young plant probably 10 years ago. It is a Northophagus southern beech. I put it in a pot obviously to start, but the secret is knock the bottom out of the pot, dig a nice hole, fill it full of nice compost, plant it. You have to water the pot for 2 or 3 years, but after that, it looks after itself. Why I want the roots to go in the ground is to save me watering. Otherwise, it'd be a full-time. I've got enough work to do without full-time watering.
When we had the nursery, he was obsessed with the business. Of course, it was our livelihood then, but now he's obsessed with his garden.
This part is another Japanese garden. It took us 20 years to pull that over. Obviously pulling it over gradually. It's a pain in the neck when I'm clipping it, but I'm pleased with it, yes. The main work is all my cloud pruning.
He doesn't like me being let loose with the secateurs. So, David, what are you doing up there?
I'm getting up here to do a bit of cloud pruning. I might not be able to get down, but that's...
Oh, well, I'll send you tea up.
Worry about that later.
I think I could probably climb up there.
Send her up then. I like cloud pruning. Cloud pruning the acer. Be careful where you cut so as it looks as natural as possible. If I cut that there, you've got that horrible stump sticking out. It doesn't look right. So it's got to be cut back, hidden beneath this canopy. That is usually in the summertime what I'm occupied with. Unless I'm out buying plants, probably try and buy things which I'm not going to prune, because I've got enough pruning to do without any more. This is the first folly I built, my little abbey, with the neglected garden behind. We developed a lot of the garden. I thought, oh, I should mind some follies in the garden. Of course, once I'd done this one, I had to do some more, didn't I? And then when I was in San Giammano and saw the towers, I thought I must build a tower. I've been to Egypt, but I haven't built a pyramid yet. That's probably next on the agenda. That's something I built. Well, if anybody's a bit gullible, I'll say it's a medieval ruin. This is Elf Corner. This is where my elves live. Oh, just another whim. Well, I don't know what this is. It's probably when Val kicks me out of the house, I've got somewhere to come and stay.
We both enjoy going shopping. That's why we go to the garden centre probably twice a week.
We're in my jungle garden. It's just a mass of plants, impenetrable. I like a congested garden. So we've got bamboo, the tetrapanics and various other things. That's the Paulownia tomentosa, which these we pollard. We cut them back in the autumn or the spring. Then you get all this growth in one season, and then you get the massive leaf, but you will not get a flower. If you let it go, then you'll get a massive blue flower before the leaves open. I love plants. I love the brickwork. I thoroughly enjoyed doing the brickwork, and if I had the room, I'd do some more brickwork. You know, I like creating things.
The garden means a lot to me because I think without the garden, I would have to find another hobby because I wouldn't know what to do. I just love the plants, always loved plants, and the nature of it.
Although Val and Dave are self-confessed plantaholics, and we all know people who are obsessed by plants, they love their garden just as much as they love their plants, and it's a joy. Now, a little job that needs doing now is dividing snowdrops. Whether it's in a border or in grass, just dig up a little group of snowdrops like these, and just divide that into two, put the original clump back in the hole, and this one I'm going to move just next to it, because what you want is to make it look natural. Pop that in. There we are, that's all you have to do. They then will die back slowly, and the really important thing, as with all bulbs, is not to cut the foliage back. Don't cut the grass, don't trim them, let them die back naturally, and that will feed into next year's bulb and flower. And it's by far the best way of spreading snowdrops. Now, still to come in today's programme. Arit shows how to bring some much-needed colour to your patio or balcony by planting up a rich spring container. And we meet a dedicated veg grower whose allotment experiments bring her a bountiful harvest every season. But before that, I've got a bit of pruning to do. We're now coming to the point of the year when it really is the last opportunity to do some winter pruning of apple or pear trees, because when you prune in winter, which is while they're dormant, before they start growing, that will stimulate growth. If you prune in summer, when they're in full leaf, round about July time, that restricts it. And you can see that the growth on this is a mass of new shoots. And in time, this tree will become a complete tangle of growth. And in essence, it won't harm the tree, but it will definitely reduce the quantity and quality of the fruit, because fruit needs as much sunshine as possible to ripen, and it also needs as much air as possible, and that will restrict fungal problems in particular. Now, apples produce their fruit on spurs, and a spur is the knobbly bit. You can see here, for example, it's swollen just before the shoot, whereas a shoot like that coming off it, there are no spurs along there at all. So none of this new growth will bear any fruit this year. So you start off by just removing the clutter. Now you can see what I'm doing is I'm leaving these twiggy, quite knobbly, lumpy bits behind. This is what will produce fruit, not any new growth that comes from it. So ideally, along a main branch, you want a whole series of knobbly side shoots, and that will give you maximum harvest. All shoots growing inward, I'm going to take out. I like to create a goblet, an open shape, and that ensures maximum airflow and light. Because these are in a border, I don't want them to get too big. In fact, I try and top them off to the same height as the top of the hedge. It means that every year I have to cut them back because, of course, apple trees, like any tree, wants to grow upwards. I'm happy with that. It looks good, it fits within the border, and with any luck, it should produce lots of healthy fruit. The truth is that most of the jobs in the garden at this time of year are in preparation for a good harvest or a really good display, and under a grey March sky, the garden can still look a bit bleak. But Arit has been creating some wonderful spring colour in a container.
If you're anything like me, I expect you're craving to see some colour in the garden at the moment. I know the bulbs are on their way, but I'm impatient. I want to see something now. The answer has to be a container. Some well-chosen plants with great impact can certainly lift one's spirit. There are loads of pretty plants to choose from at garden centres at the moment, and you can decide whether to stick with old favourites or experiment with new varieties, or like me, a bit of both. I've chosen this container because it's really nice and wide, which means I can get a lot of plants into it. And because it's zinc, it's very light, which is what I want, because I'm going to be filling it full of compost and crocks. Colour of zinc is something that I really enjoy because it's pale, it's neutral, so the plant colours will really zing when they're all in there. Just make sure to add some drainage holes. I've added crocks and peat-free compost, but only about halfway up. Leave space for the plants. The way to approach your container is to think of it as a mini border. So have something that's got some height to anchor it. Around the middle, there's going to be some bulkier plants and then smaller plants that can act as the understory to frame the edge. This container will be in a position where there's a bit of sun this time of year. And I want some soft colours to match the pale late winter light. And there are some beautiful options to choose from to make the most of the season. I'm going to start with the height. So these two, this Mahonia, really love that zing of yellow and, oh, it's so fragrant. Great plant, got architectural value with its leaves, it's evergreen, so that's going to really anchor the space. In contrast, I have this tree heather, Erica australis Polar Express, and it's got a tiny, delicate, creamy flower, really small leaves, so when you put them together, the contrast sits very well. So just pop these at the back, and then that's my starting point. Next layer is this mid layer here, and very excited by these. This Helleborus Anna's Red is absolutely gorgeous. Take a look at that flower. And inside, the sort of yellow stamens are going to pick up so nicely with the Mahonia. And then I have this heuchera. This is a new one, heuchera huckleberry. This one's quite pewtery on the top side, and then the underside, you know, when the wind goes, you've got this nicely picking up with the flower of the hellebore. So it's going to work really, really nicely and add volume into the container. So let's see what these look like in position. Now, I'm not teasing out the roots at the moment because I just want to get them in position, play around, make sure that they're sitting where I want them to be. This one, for example, the leaf is kind of bunching into this. So be playful, turn things around. These are my smaller plants that are going to sit as the understory. Really love this leaf, again, very architectural. And because of this spike, it's going to have a reference to the Mahonia plant. And this flower colour is perfect. It's going to sit so nicely with the tree heather here. So that's wonderful. And then I've got this little Erica furzy, it's another heather, and I like this little Erica furzy because at the tip of its flower, it's very, very dark, picking up all the dark tones within the hellebore and the heuchera, and then the rest of it, the paler pink, look at that, just sits so nicely in contrast to the large leaf of heuchera huckleberry. This is really starting to look fabulous. You can see that there are little pickups that are happening from flower colour, leaf textures, and also as well, it's the size and scale of different flowers and leaves. So you've got the larger scale flower here on the hellebore playing against the smaller flowers on the Mahonia and the heather. So there's a real harmony that's coming into this container, which is more than just the colour. Last plant to go in is this Narcissus Avalanche. It absolutely smells divine. I love it. I'm placing them in between the bolder flowers. The stark white blooms will light up the container and balance out the stronger colours. Fill in the gaps with some more compost and give it a thorough watering. And remember to water regularly, especially in dry weather. I'm really happy with this container. It celebrates spring, there's colour, there's movement through it. It's that real lift that's needed to start the season.
I really like the way that Arit has used the silvery tones of the foliage with the galvanised metal of the container to enrich the colours. It works beautifully. And certainly all the bulbs growing in containers outside the potting shed have become such an important part of our spring. It's absolutely a signal of what's to come. But there's no doubt that spring colour can get dissipated. It's a good idea to group it together. That's what we do here in the spring garden. It's by massing it all in one relatively small part of the garden, you get a real hit of colour. Now I'm cutting back this fern, and as the ferns go over, and these have been very good all winter, new fronds will start to unfurl. So cut them back hard, right to the knuckle, and then that will let light and air in there. And above all, when the new ferns start to unfurl, they are so beautiful. So you want to be able to see them. You don't want any of the old growth obscuring that. Now, it's time to visit the last of your gardens this week, and it takes us to Surrey.
Hello everybody, my name's Terry Doe, and I'm probably the least expert gardener that's ever appeared on this programme. But I've still managed to make a garden, and I love it. Not so long back, this little bit of lawn here, that was all blue chippings because I didn't want to do any gardening. In fact, one of the reasons we bought this house is because it had such a small garden. Now, I guess the only reason we'd move is to get a bigger garden. A few years ago, I was diagnosed with throat cancer, and life is put on hold until you actually get the all clear and you know that you've got a future. And so I was sort of in limbo, and then finally it came through, and then I knew I could sort of follow the Audrey Hepburn quote of those who plant a garden invest in the future, and I knew I had a future to invest in, so the garden became a translation of that, and it did have a really sort of deep, significant meaning to me, and it always will, I think. You see these borders here, this raised bed has produced a dozen wonderful, huge cucumbers for me, and more by luck than anything else, but the borders themselves are growing absolutely stuffed, as per Monty's instructions. If you're going to plant, sort of plant big. So I have managed to grow a few baskets on. I love being in here, and it's all right, isn't it? I'm pleased with it. So if it says anything, it says anybody, but anybody, can build themselves a garden. Because believe me, if I can, anyone can.
I'm not sure if gardening found Terry or Terry found gardening, but it's great that he's getting so much pleasure from it. And it just goes to show, you don't need to know the Latin name of something to know that it's beautiful. I think the most important job that anybody can do in their garden at this time of year is to mulch. Mulching does three things. It improves the soil structure and nutrition, particularly if you use an organic material. The second job it does is to reduce evaporation. It will keep moisture in the soil, and whilst at this time of year that doesn't matter, it certainly does matter when you get to summer. And finally, if you put it on thickly enough, it stops light reaching the soil, which will stop weed seeds germinating. Now this year, I'm trialling a mulch I've never used before. It's a recycled green waste that we've bought. It's very nice to use, it's easy to handle, and I have high hopes. But there are other things you can use. For example, what we've got here is composted farmyard manure. And if we had smell-o-vision, you would be able to reassure yourselves it does smell very strongly of manure. What I would say is do not use it as a mulch until it's been composted, because it'll be too strong. It'll burn the plants. The other thing that we use here at Longmeadow is bark. Now I've got two grades of bark here. You can get it in chips, you can get it in sort of shredded material like this. Bark is very good as a mulch around shrubs, trees, hedges, or we use this on grasses. And this is very effective at suppressing weeds, but takes longer to incorporate into the soil. You don't have to use an organic material. If you've got a dry garden, a Mediterranean garden, these are flint pebbles. They will keep the moisture in, they will stop the weeds growing, but of course they won't rot down and incorporate into the soil. Now this is not my favourite, but it works and you often see it. This is slate. Spread that on the ground, the water can get through it, light can't, it will stop weeds, and even old tiles will work as a mulch. Now it doesn't matter what you use, the critical thing is putting it on thickly enough. As you can see, that is 2 inches or thereabouts in old money. Anything less than that is not going to do the job as well. And obviously that means you use more material, but it's far more effective to do half the garden at the right thickness every other year than the whole garden at half the thickness every year. So just spread it out over all the bare soil, nice and thick. And it's not a bad idea before you mulch, just to take out the worst of the weeds. Any perennial weeds you can see, you should remove first. And I would just stress, you don't need to dig it in. You want that layer to stay on the soil for the rest of the summer. Now, last August, we went to visit a rather special allotment, just packed with a huge range of fascinating vegetables.
It looks like an ordinary plot that grows everything, but in certain sections I'm experimenting. I think I've got more than 100 different things growing at one time. So it's like a mini supermarket, or Aladdin's cave. My name is Rekha Mistry, and this is my allotment on the edge of London. Gardening for me is a lot of curiosity mixed with cooking and mixed with, will it work in my soil? Those 3 questions work side by side. And if it works on the table, then it will be back again on the allotment. I love to grow. Anything I see, I like to grow. It's the curiosity of a seed that just generates so much excitement. It's sad, but yeah, it does. It means if I see new vegetables in a restaurant or a supermarket, I want to try growing them. And some of my experiments come from my childhood in Zambia. The story of my amaranth started as knowing that there was a leaf or a spinach that my mom used to grow and cook. And it's got 3 different types of varieties. And it's actually the Asian variety. So you've got the Asian variety, you've got an African variety, and then you've got the Caribbean variety. It's a substitute for spinach, and it grows perfectly well outdoors. It doesn't matter if it's raining, it doesn't matter if it's hot, and it self-seeds, which is even so much better because the self-seeders are so much stronger and slugs don't like them either, so I get to eat everything. Because I want to know what grows well in my soil and what cooks well. I do a new mass experiment each year with one type of vegetable. Tomato was a very big trial. This year, there's only a few that you see, but it started with 40 different varieties just to see what we like as a family. And so what you see here now is our favorite beefsteak. It's called Costoluto Fiorentino. This tomato is actually a good all-rounder. You can use it as a salad tomato, you can slice it, but you can even cook with it. It's a great sweet tomato. I can't do without these, and I miss them a lot in the winter time because you really taste summer through this tomato. Salad tomatoes tend to be too sweet for curries. I'd often add lemon. But then I found this one, Burmese sour.
They are as bright as they could be, but they're as sour as anything, and it is perfect for curries, perfect for very spicy food. And once I used it, it took me back to the curries I've had when I've gone on holiday to India.
And despite trialing 40 tomatoes, I'm still finding new ones I love.
This one's called Black Beauty. I grew it last year and it's amazing. I mean, just look at it, the shine. I haven't polished them. It is just the way it is. No matter how dull the weather is, they'll just gleam at you. I tend to use these as a salad tomato, just slice them, but you can even cook with them. And it's a beautiful tasting tomato, which is deep red on the inside. It's slightly sweet because I think it's catching all the sun. And I think that's what makes it a real winner. I tend to grow flowers which are pollinator friendly. There's always ones that can self-seed because I haven't got time to grow them all the time. Wherever they fall, I'll just let them be. So things like the tagetes, the borage, the Cupid's arrow, they look even lovely when they're in seed heads. And that's what I like, is just trying to be as friendly to the wildlife as I can, but still keep beauty to the place.
I spotted edamame beans in the supermarkets a while back. And now, 2 growing seasons later, I'm really pleased with the results.
We don't like broad beans, so I trial them, just thinking they're a Japanese variety. Will they work in our climate? And they've loved it. It's really wet this year, and they still performed like they did last year. It will grow in any condition I put it under, and it's still going to give me a crop. It's a great all-rounder, I think, of a plant.
Alongside the modern varieties, I also grow heritage seeds that have fallen out of fashion. And this year, I've got several French beans.
This one is what they call the Q Blue, and you can see why it's called the Q Blue. It's a very deep purple stem as well as the pod. They have produced the most enormous amount of pod, and not just pod, the amount of beans per pod is amazing. Right from base to the top, we've got so many beans. It's very nice to find that I can add this to the cupboard, so that means I need to go and buy another container. That's how lovely it is, and then try and find a space in the cupboard for them. But the whole idea is there is things out there, old, ancient, whatever you want to call them, that will work.
This one has been another unexpected success. It's called a Majorcan pea bean, which works like peas when it's young and is eaten as a whole bean when they mature. This plant is laden with pods, so it's definitely a keeper. But on this Aladdin's cave of a plot, quantity isn't the only sign of success.
This might sound a bit bizarre. It might look like a nothing, but this is my best ever thing that I've trialed this year. It's called Carthamus tinctoris. It's a poor man's saffron. And I was amazed that I can actually even grow a plant. It doesn't look like anything. You wouldn't think that such a beautiful flower can be edible, but it is edible. What I'd like to use this for is what they use in Spain, paella.
Its common name is safflower and makes this poor man's saffron. So watch this space. It's successes like edamame beans and Black Beauty that keep me excited about possibilities, about the cooking, and always about the seed.
Growing from seed is just magical. Watching a seed germinate, that in itself. I don't need any TV, just watching a seed grow. That's it. I'm done.
have to say I completely agree with Rekha about the virtues of Costoluto Fiorentino tomato. It's delicious and it's certainly an essential in this garden. Now what I'm growing here now are some summer cabbage. Cabbages are something that we tend to associate with winter, and if you're my age, with sort of school dinners that are not particularly attractive. But summer cabbage is really good and it has a freshness to it, and there are certain varieties that you sow now, ready to harvest from midsummer through till September. Now I've got two here. I've got Greyhound, which is pointed, and Primo, which is quite small. And a small cabbage is a useful thing because if they're too big, you know what happens, you eat a bit of it and the rest ends up uneaten, sitting in the bottom of the fridge for ages and then goes on the compost heap. So I'm going to sow Greyhound. You can see there, round seed, and all brassica seeds tend to be round, and just sprinkle them thinly. I will cover that over lightly, and I'll put these somewhere warm, which in my case is in the greenhouse, but a windowsill will do the job just as well. Just press that down. I will water it, and those will germinate in about 10 days' time. They'll grow, we'll prick them out, and plant them out round about May, depending on the weather, ready to harvest July, August, and into September. Okay, that's one small job done. Here's some more for you for this weekend. If you want your Christmas amaryllis to flower again next year, cut off any spent flower stems, put it somewhere warm and bright, and that can be outside once the weather gets warmer. Keep it well watered and feed it once a week while it grows new leaves. Then, at the end of summer in August, stop watering completely. Put it somewhere dark and let it go dormant. When the leaves have died back, bring it out in December, and it should regrow flowering stems. Broad beans are one of the few vegetable seeds that will germinate while the soil is still cool, so sow them now. I'm sowing mine in a raised bed in a grid, with each bean about 9 inches apart. But you can sow them in double rows. Push the beans about 1 inch or 2 into the soil, rake them over lightly, and they should start to appear in a few weeks' time. Now is the ideal time to prune buddleia. They flower on new growth, so cut them back hard, leaving 1 or 2 vigorous buds. This will stimulate regrowth that will carry strong flowers from midsummer onwards. I always feel at this time of year that there is a moment when the garden is poised, although it's almost suspending, waiting for the action to happen. But on Sunday, we have the spring equinox, which means that the days are getting longer than the nights, and it's that extra light that will make the garden grow. And spring will be bursting out here before we know it. But here in the Jewel Garden, actually the garden is emptier than it is at any other time of year because all the winter growth has been cut back, we've mulched it, and the first tentative shoots are appearing. And now's a good time to get in and move plants, to divide them, replant them, maybe add a few extras. But I'll have to wait till next week because we've run out of time for today. But I'll see you back here at Longmeadow at 8 o'clock next Friday. So until then, bye-bye.